electoral system is rigged, and Americans know it. A recent Rasmussen poll found that a majority of Americans think that elections are rigged towards incumbents. It's no surprise that people have caught on to the massive advantages of incumbency, such as being able to draw their own district lines, something we'll get in later tonight, name recognition, of course, and the massive amounts of money from special interests. Now, I'll get to the money thing later. But the question is, since we know, what are we doing about it? Or should I say, what are Americans doing about it? Well, the answer is clear. Nothing. Because even though we know the system is rigged, and when Congress is at an all-time low for approval ratings, these people still get elected. Now, it's not guaranteed, of course. You can point to rare examples, such as the defeat of Eric Cantor by unknown guy Dave Bratt, but the norm is the same terrible politicians being reelected over and over again. Now that brings me back to the money angle. There was another poll that was done by the Demos group that shows that a majority of Americans, 60%, get that their representatives are more responsive to private interests with financial resources than to public interests, and will vote in a way that pleases their donors. And we all know this. People get it. They know the problem. They know that the government doesn't work for them because at the end of the day, it's bought and sold to the highest bidder. Now, to bring it back around to incumbency, the most amazing stat is the one that states that 9 out of 10 times, 90% of the times, the candidate with the most money wins the election. And incumbents almost always have that advantage on the national stage. Now, all those factors lead to a certain level of apathy to being part of the political process. Why vote? They'll suck anyway. Why should I vote? While I certainly agree with that sentiment, I believe that apathy is how we got here. And being apathetic is not going to get us out. The issue here is that the interests of a few are being prioritized over the interests of the many. Now that further gets reinforced by the many no longer being involved in the process at all. Never mind that it's about design, that it's by design. Of course they don't want us involved in the process. Because we all know that the interests of the wealthy versus the rest of us are very, very different. Anything that helps the general public or is a concern to the general public is not at all a concern to the wealthy. And it's reflected by our politicians and in our politics. So, before we get to solutions, I want to get the panel's take on this problem. Now, you guys, Sean, Dan, what do you think about this poll? Is it surprising at all the level of Americans that are aware of this corruption and yet at the same time are apathetic about it? And we'll start with you, Dan.
I think that this happens in all countries, and I think that the question that I keep trying to reframe it here in Canada is that they don't want you to vote. The idea that people are just specifically apathetic does put some onus on us as a society to get better. There's no doubt that there's part of that, it's on us, but I think that more and more you have to start asking yourselves, like, why don't they want you to vote? And these are the questions that I feel like the media ignores in great scope, where we never have conversations about not only just gerrymandering like we will later tonight, but also the idea of where these things being played out in the court system. There's like several branches, whether you vote or not. We took a look last week on Truth Matchup at the Roberts Court, citing like about 69% of the time with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So like, let's pretend you even get the right representative in government. The idea of who's working for corporations at this point goes beyond your ability to vote in or out. That being said, yeah, I mean, I think that it's nice to see people that are aware of it, but I hate the phrasing of apathy. You're not cynical to see this system and say this isn't right. You're not apathetic necessarily to think that if you go and vote it won't mean anything. There are some serious issues with the way the democratic process has been set up. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, is that it's not apathy. it actually is a serious layered problem. And I think
But
that,
but but
yeah,
Dan, it's a serious layered problem, and you're absolutely correct.
right,
But the issue with apathy that I guess the way that I approach it, and the reason that I say that it's apathy is because people don't want to become involved in the political process because they look at it and they see all the problems and go, oof, I don't want to touch that. That's shit. I don't want to get near it. I don't want to do anything about it. And that's one of the major problems is because of that mindset, nothing is going to happen to fix it. I'm not saying voting per se is the only way to fix the issue.
for
Most
sure.
likely you're going to vote in the same yahoos or the same kind of yahoos or the same kind of bought politician that you have before because the
Right,
system is inherently broken. But getting involved, and we'll touch on ways
sure.
to get involved later and solutions after we throw to Sean, but there are solutions, but a lot of people don't see them, they're not aware of them, or they're apathetic to the process, which doesn't allow them to learn enough to find out what the solutions actually are.
But are we just basing apathy on voter turnout, though? Is that what we're saying? Because I mean, like we
No,
talked about.
just involvement in the
Okay,
process
sure.
itself, and which is really, I understand it's really hard to quantify because you
Hmm.
can't just look at a chart and say, oh, these people are apathetic. No, they don't show up to vote. That's only one portion of it. But it's the fact that a lot of people don't want to
For
actually
sure.
let any sort of political discussions into their lives. They hear anything political, and it's like, nope, get it away from me. I'm not interested in hearing about it. Whatever. I'm just going to vote for whatever. I'm not going to vote. So that's really sort of the problem that I think, like apathy is maybe it's not the correct wording for it or the phrase for it, but I think it most accurately describes what I'm talking about. But before we get too derailed, if you want to finish your point, and then we'll throw to Sean.
No, I think. Listen, I think you're totally right that people are apathetic. I'll go you one more doing being the comedy writer on the panel. People are stupid. We do have some serious issues and people being aware of anything going on the planet. But it is important to find out what 1990s sitcom character are you. So, I mean, yeah. Every time I hear people say, "Oh man, I just don't have enough time in my life to follow politics and news," and then my Facebook feed is filled with quizzes. So I have a feeling that there's some spare time, and everybody, mass downloading Netflix shows and binge watching for 2 days straight. I'm thinking a couple of those hours could be spent on your local news. But so I don't totally disagree with you. I agree that yes, we do have issues as a public as well.
Right, and I think it's also the desire angle too. It's not just people don't have time, it's that people just see how dirty it is and corrupt it is and go, I just don't want any part of that. I don't care. But anyway, we've talked enough. Let's throw it over to Sean. Let's get your opinion on this.
All right. So I have a few issues with a couple things that you were saying, Jeff. But first, I want to clarify Dan's point for him. What he's saying is that people aren't apathetic; they're cynical, but they have a right to be cynical because their cynicism has been tested and proven. So what he's saying is that they are basically cynically tested. Uh, took me a while, but I got that joke out there. Secondly,
Well played.
voting, like not wanting to vote, like voting is what got us into this mess. Like every candidate on there was voted for. So how can that be the solution? Obviously, that
But
point is
by a decreasingly small amount of people.
obviously that point is totally wrong. So voting is horrible and you shouldn't do it. But more importantly, there's like a very like interesting study. I don't know exactly where it's from, but basically the amount of like energy that it takes to be informed about politics compared to the amount of impact that you can have as a voter, as an organizer, like it actually makes, if like you study it in the ways that like economists study things, it actually makes sense for people to be uninformed because you get actually very little gain as an individual from being informed, that like measurable gain, because you really can't have that much of an impact because money is such an influence. So like sometimes their apatheticness is actually logical, and I think that's the problem, is that you have to create a system where people who are informed do have more power, or where they can have more of an impact, and like that has to do with money issues in politics and stuff like that. But the courts, like that's a long-term solution. Like you're gonna have to get like I mean basically all 9 justices vote poorly and sometimes good on a lot of issues. So on like a lot of mixtures of issues. So you're gonna have to over time try and rebuild the Supreme Court. Like that's gonna be a long-term process that could take like a generation. So like that's the biggest challenge to like Dan's point about unelected officials, ruining the country.
And going back to, and I'm glad you brought up the money angle. Going back to that, I really want to steer the discussion more towards solutions. So what about solutions? You guys have outlined the problems actually pretty accurately. So now, and Sean's point especially, talking about how people don't have any measurable impact on our political system due to the massive amounts of money and corruption and everything. What are the solutions? And I want to ask you guys what you guys think the best solutions would be. Let's start with you, Dan.
Wow. So in a soundbite, right? 30 seconds, go. How to solve everything. So listen, here's one that's really simple, and I think that we have to have a serious conversation starting within our own community, which is the TYT community. Yet I'm about to do, a show this week where I will probably use, Republicans as humor, comical clickbait, but that's part of the problem is that we do not respect the other sides of debates. We get into these name calling. It's no longer just about like I disagree with you ideologically and let's have a nice debate about this, which is why I like your show so much, because when I come on it, we do have these conversations from all sides, but you're seeing that less and less. You see Jon Stewart rally for sanity a few years ago. I think that was sort of the key point of that, which was no matter what side you're on, this kind of debate like is pushing people away from the political process because it's not just about I disagree with your thoughts, let's go get a beer anymore. It's like you are inherently evil and want to like ruin the country. And that's a huge, huge problem because not only does it dissuade people from actually entering into the system, but it also creates this environment where you see the Tea Party, if you will, when we make the public, if you will, apathetic, when we make people not want to show up to the polls, it leaves the ideological bents of both parties, the fringes, to be the ones that are super engaged. So getting money out of politics is a huge part of this solution because when you get money out of politics, it helps. The way you fundraise is the same reason why you have clickbait being so popular on the internet. People that are rabid are more likely to donate. A situation like, do you want to read these 3-page long subtext of an issue? Oh, and please give us $20. Just doesn't exist. They're coming for your guns, or they're going to, on our side of things, the environment, or whatever it is that they like really hammer home on. That is an issue. So the two things that I would say is we really need to start to ramp down the hyperbole. You really need to get money out of politics. And the final thing for me would be where there are ridings where you have a moderate, I really think you need to think twice before you just kill that moderate in your district. Like, it's a moderate Republican. Hey, that's the seat that Democrats should get in. And then, slowly but surely over the last 20 years, all the moderate Republicans are gone, and all the, same on both sides, whatever side you want to come at it from. And you, as we said, are left with these ideological folks who don't necessarily want to have a reasoned discussion because they just are so hell-bent on planting their heels, and that's that. So I think that that's a big part of it, is how we talk about each other. Respect needs to be sort of inserted back in the money issue.
Dan's point about being able to state your opponent's position clearly is important for like debate and discourse and all that. But like I don't think we should give more deference and more respect to the congressmen and senators and presidents. I'm super tired of hearing about how they're all honorable individuals when we all know that most of them aren't. Probably close to 98% of them aren't. Like, there's some people that can be swayed at the state level. You're seeing a lot of that with Wolfpack and stuff like that. But, like, we know that a lot of these people are, like, party to the money more than anything, and very few of them have principles. And even the ones that have principles, very few of them have principles, and, like, very fewer of them have principles that we would agree with on the panel. Mm-hmm. So
But Sean, there's ways to do that, right? Without demonizing somebody. Like there's ways to say, "Sir, I disagree with your scruples," if you will.
Right.
So
But
that's
I mean, like I get your point. Like there's no need to be like overly vicious, right? But I think like like laughing at people in power. I think that's all like healthy behavior, and just trying to shine a light on people who like do the wrong thing in Congress. But like I would get rid of like the personal like life attacks about who this guy's dating or who's sending who pictures of their Johnson or Wiener in that case. But but I just want to get into the incumbency angle because incumbents have a lot more advantages. We were talking about before the show how members of Congress are allowed to do mailers to inform their constituents about legislation and stuff like that. But since there's no real check on that, they actually mail out election stuff for free to all their constituents. So that's a huge advantage they have over their competition that doesn't even factor into their budget. Like they'll have that advantage basically no matter what unless you use legislation to correct it. And the other thing I want to point out is how we all, except for me, love to hate on Citizens United. But the one thing that has kind of closed the incumbency, non-incumbency gap is these out of campaign expenditures. Because when you're raising money through a campaign, like the connections help you. If some outside group just hates that candidate, then they'll raise money against them. So that kind of helps. It's like money killing money in that situation, which is kind of awesome in that circumstance. But
in that sort of way, Sean, it's sort of like two giants fighting in a sandbox.
right. I'm just saying but I'd rather see new people keep flowing in and hopefully like we figure it out. You know what I mean? Than the same person. Like we know that guy is that guy is a bad guy, and we're gonna keep like electing him. So I was saying that's one positive of that ruling.
All right. Speaking of actual real solutions, what can be done? Go to wolf-pack.com. You definitely have to go check that out, or check out the Root Strikers, Larry Lassik's group. All of these people, all of these groups are trying to change the influence of money in politics, of corruption on our system. And if you want to, I think you should get involved with your local Wolfpack group. There are Wolfpack groups in many states, and we've had a couple of victories. So I would definitely get involved with that, and because that's really the first part of the solution. And I'd say for me, we focus on the first part before we get to the next one.
Well, also, I just want to add in one thing. Do like the Tea Party does. Primary your candidates, Democrats. Like, come on. Like, vote in primaries. And a lot of times that's the only election that you get because of the gerrymandered districts. So vote in your primaries.
I think the solution, totally what you're saying is, both really accurate, which is it's local. Like if you really want to save democracy, you've got to start at City Hall and then work your way outwards. Like it's not something that can totally be fixed with the magic wand. So yes, Wolfpack's awesome, but yeah, get involved locally.
Exactly, and that's why I say people should stop being apathetic and start getting involved more on the local issue, especially because you're right, it all starts locally.